that it's just preposterous, the idea that if a party comes third in terms of the number of votes, it still has somehow the right to carry on squatting in number 10 and continue to lay claim to having the Prime Minister of the country.
This is very important because in the past you haven't said whether the number of votes or the number of seats was most important to you. Now you've come off that fence, you're saying the number of votes.
No, I'm talking about two different things. No, that's not right. That's not right.
If Labour come third in the popular vote, Gordon Brown can't stay in number 10.
You're confusing two things, Andrew. What I've said in the past, which is that I think a party which has got the most votes and seats, which in other words has got the strongest mandate, but without an absolute majority, has got the right to seek to form the government. What I'm saying here is pointing at a very, very irrational possible outcome of our potty electoral system, which is that a party that has spectacularly lost the election because fewer and fewer people are voting for it than any other party could nonetheless, according to constitutional tradition and convention, still lay claim to providing the Prime Minister of the country.
So let's be crystal clear on this.
By the way, ask Gordon Brown this, but I'm assuming he would also accept that would be a very irrational outcome.
Well, let's just be crystal clear about it. Let's suppose the outcome is that Labour lose the election in terms of number of votes cast around the country, but because of the electoral system, have the largest number of MPs in a hung parliament. You would not support Gordon Brown remaining as Prime Minister under those circumstances, and you would not go into any kind of relationship with Gordon Brown which would allow him to stay Prime Minister.
Absolutely. I think a party which has come third, and so millions of people have decided to abandon, has lost the election spectacularly, cannot then lay claim to providing the Prime Minister of this country.
If the Labour Party came back to you, there's endless briefing about this to journalists at the moment, and said Gordon Brown is stepping aside, we now have Alan Johnson, or we're going to have David Miliband coming in as an unelected Prime Minister, we would like to go into alliance with you, partly to change the electoral system. What would you say?
Well, I mean, here we get into the sort of what-if territory I find very difficult to anticipate. I personally think... Well, can I just try and answer your question? I imagine that both David Cameron and Gordon Brown are going to have problems with their own parties if they fail to deliver on all the sort of expectations they've raised. I think both of them are clearly going to be quite insecure leaders in their own parties. David Cameron, because he's almost complacently assumed he's just going to waft into number 10, and it doesn't look as if that's going to happen. And Gordon Brown, because he will have led his party to the worst election outcome for Labour in very, very many years. So it's not for me to second-guess how their parties then react to leaders and leaderships that have not succeeded.
See, what I thought you might say, well, if I may say so, is that if the Labour Party lost the election, changed their leader in some sort of sleight-of-hand way and offered to go into a coalition with you, that would be a democratic outrage.
Well, what I'm, as I said, firstly, it's not for me at least, I think, or indeed for anybody outside the Labour or the Conservative parties, to sort of speculate on their woes after the election and what they then choose to do with their leaders. Secondly, I've been very, very clear that the things I want to pursue in any environment after the general election are not about hand-picking other politicians. It's about delivering the commitments on which we are campaigning during this general election campaign. And if I can just, for one moment, sort of dwell on those, because that's really what I do passionately care about. Hardwiring fairness into our tax system, transforming our education by giving real one-to-one care and smaller class sizes to children. A new approach to the economy. I think people have become very enthusiastic over the last week or so about the idea of a new approach to politics. Now what we need to do is harness that enthusiasm and say, let's do something different on the economy as well. We're the only party saying, split up the banks, make them lend to viable British businesses, a new approach to the economy where we never again allow our economy to be held hostage by one clique in one sector, in banking as it is. And, of course, our radical programme of constitutional and political reform in Westminster. Those are the things I care about. And I've been really upfront with people that if they want any clue about what the Liberal Democrats will do, that is our starting point. It's not a secret. It's not a state secret.
Sure.
It's not in some file labelled top secret. That is what we will deliver.
And of those four things, you'd be doing very, very well to get either of the parties to agree to all of them. Horse trading, of course, would have to happen in a hung parliament. How important is voting reform? Is that negotiable?
My own view is that one of the things that this exciting general election campaign has done is it's made what used to be a rather obscure, pointy-headed debate about electoral reform actually something which more and more people are concentrating on, because more and more people are realising how utterly irrational it is that Gordon Brown has been in power when only 22% of people voted for the Labour Party at the last general election. David Cameron thinks that he can somehow inherit power rather than earn it with a sort of similar fraction of support from the British people. And you've got hundreds and hundreds of Labour and Conservative MPs who complacently think that they can have jobs for life when only a minority of their constituents actually vote for them. I think people are realising this just isn't on. It's not fair, it's not democratic, and crucially, it has shut out millions and millions of people who've been taken for granted by the old parties. So I think one of the reasons why young people...
Is that a yes to it's non-negotiable?
It's more than a yes. I don't think any party can now, after the huge changes we've seen over the last week or two, and millions of people, young people rushing to register to vote and saying, we want to make this our election. We want to assert our vote.
So voting reform is non-negotiable.
I think it is more than that. I think it is unavoidable for any party, whatever the outcome. You cannot now duck the fact that we have a political system, an electoral system, which is completely out of step with the aspirations and the hopes of millions of British people. So and a political system can't survive for very long if it's that out of whack with the rest of the country it's supposed to be representing.
How important is it, therefore, for you that David Cameron has refused now to rule out voting reform? Is that a breakthrough moment?
To be honest, I just can't follow what David Cameron... I mean, one moment he's telling people that if they don't do what they're told and vote for the Conservatives, he's going to get his friends in the City of London to sort of tear the house down in the markets. The next moment he's got Ken Clarke charging around saying there's going to be political Armageddon if there's a hung Parliament, and now he's sort of saying, well, maybe I'll look at changes. They've got to make up their mind. I think what the Conservatives have discovered, much to their dismay, is they've been completely... they're out of step. They're out of step with a country that's moved on, that doesn't want these tired old choices between these old battalions of British politics, and they're now trying to scramble around to catch up.
It sounds to me that you think the Labour Party is seriously on the slide at the moment in this election campaign.
Well, I think the Labour Party has a fundamental problem, which any party does when they've governed for a long time. They're trying to govern as a party of renewal when they have a record of failure.
And you have big philosophical differences with them. You would like ultimately to replace them as the progressive force in British politics.
I think if you look at our agenda of tax reform, so that no one pays any tax on the first £10,000 they earn, hardwiring fairness into the tax system, educational reform, so you get real social mobility, that is a liberal progressive agenda whose time, I think, has come.
So you can't both want to replace them and embrace them?
Well, I think there are lots of people in the Labour Party who I understand why they voted for Labour back in 1997. I didn't vote for Labour in 1997, but even I got caught up in the excitement back then of, after 18 years of an increasingly tired, inward-looking Conservative government, of this freshness of the Labour Party. They offered all this hope. Yeah. 13 years later, social mobility's gone down, inequality's gone up. We've had the bankers hold a gun to the head of the rest of the British economy. We've got this implosion in legitimacy.
So you can't work with these people.
But what I'm saying is, it's not the people, it's the people who supported them, the people who had those hopes of something fairer and better, I think are looking for a new home, and they are finding it in the Liberal Democrats, and that is exciting.
Could you sit round a cabinet table with David Cameron?
I could sit around a cabinet table with anyone who agrees with me that what we need to do is hardwire fairness into the into the tax system.
Brown?
It's anyone who... Look, if miracle of miracles, Gordon Brown or David Cameron or anybody else actually decides that they agree with the big changes, both political, social and economic, that we are advocating, fundamental reform, fundamental change, that we are advocating in this election campaign, I am not...
And you have to go back to your party in those circumstances, though, don't you? You've got this triple lock and you take that seriously, you have to go back to your MPs.
Well, I think any leader worth their salt would, of course, seek to bring their party along with them, and I would do that.
Right. Just a couple of questions about you yourself. You've come under the spotlight, both from your background and your expenses and so on. You're just as posh as David Cameron, aren't you?
Well, I'm very, very lucky, and I've never hidden it. I've had a very, very lucky upbringing.
You're not really an outsider, is I suppose, the more important point.
I don't think I've ever pretended to be something I'm not. I am sort of who I am. But I think what I represent, I think what my party represents, is something different. And, you can't fault the Liberal Democrats. You can't fault for me for arguing consistently for a different approach to the economy. We were the only party to argue for reform of banking years ago when we were being shouted down.
Right.
The only party to object to the illegal invasion of Iraq, and the only party arguing for new, clean politics.
Nick Clegg, thank you very much indeed for joining us.